on if you would like to have a chat with me. It's nice to see your faces and have a cordial with you. Hi Claudine, how are you? Welcome. Welcome to the third session of our Te Ara Ako series. I'm really excited to share a little bit more with you today. And before we jump in, I'll just start off with a karakia to get us going. So feel free to join in. Kia inoi tātou. E te whānau, whaia kia marama, kia whai take e roto i o mahi katoa, kia tū, kia kaha, kia hore te marino, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou kia tātou katoa. Awesome. Again, this karakia is for you to use if you would like, so feel free to take a screenshot if you would like to take on that karakia that you would like to practice. It is a beautiful one to use, and the same with our karakia whakamutanga at the end of the session as well. Okay, we have been doing a lot around Te Ara Ako, our innovation framework that we've developed with Science Alive and EP. I wanted to just do a wee bit of a recap because we didn't talk about the stages again last week, but I think session 3 will just recap a little bit about each of the stages. And then my plan today is to go through a couple of examples. So I'm going to take you through my planning process of how I've taken an idea or a question and I've turned it into a living, breathing project that kids can use. Now, this will look different for you guys if you are in the classroom delivering this. Okay, because I'm not in the classroom anymore. So what I'm going to do is give you kind of the two lenses. So as we go through a project, I'll say, if I was in the classroom, this is what I would be doing alongside that. Okay, so I'm going to give you some visuals, some really cool processes that you can do to kind of align this to your planning. And then at the very end, I'll tell you about what we're going to do next week, which is really cool. So just as a wee recap, there we go. We've talked a lot about process thinking. We've talked a lot about skills that we want students to leave our classrooms with, or skills we want to impart, knowledge we want to impart on our kids. We talked a lot last week about our vision for our kids in front of us and what we're got into teaching for, really. What's the big picture ideas here that we want to give our kids? So process thinking and technology is a really great way, as I've preaching to the choir here, I know, but it is a really great way to get that deep impact learning. So if you can think of ways in your practice as you develop as a teacher to go into your classroom and think about, yes, I'm doing guided reading, but how can that link in to a really meaningful, impactful thing? That's where you're going to get change in your kids' attitudes towards learning, and also change in how they feel about collaborating with others and communicating about their learning. So when you're doing subjects, my suggestion, and this will come with time and with experience, is to try and integrate as much as you can, because integrating across that curriculum is where you're going to get kids making connections. Because when we operate in the workplace, we don't operate in isolation of each other. We're always kind of working on those skills. Okay? So we've talked about the Pounamu kind of visual that goes through there. A really beautiful way to bring this framework into a classroom is to actually bring in a piece of Pounamu, hand it out, have the kids sitting in a circle, and actually get the kids to unpack it by touching and feeling a piece of Pounamu. It is a beautiful way to kind of unpack the thinking process and relate it to something that the kids will understand. So when you're talking about this one, for example, discover, tuhura, actually picturing the kids or getting them to imagine breaking a rock open and finding that green stone in the middle and seeing that piece of green stone. So for them, they're understanding that that discovery is what you're working on when you're unpacking that stage. Same for hono, connect, feeling the marbling, feeling the roughness, looking at the colours, using their senses, connecting those ideas together and then picturing what that rock could then become or that stone could then become. So again, you've got that beautiful metaphor going throughout. So I'm just going to recap a little bit about each of the stages here. So I'll go back to the beginning. So pakeke is that wondering stage. Okay, it's a skill in itself to wonder what is in that water over there. That looks like something I want to dig a little bit deeper into. Okay. This is your hook phase. This is your igniter, something that's going to spark curiosity and spark engagement into the topic. It's not necessarily seeing a solution straight away. So and what I mean by that is if you're doing a community garden as a project, for example, you might not take them to a community garden. You might take them to the back of a supermarket to see all the waste that gets thrown out. You want to almost shock them into knowing that there's a problem that needs to be solved. If you're looking at a client or you're looking at kind of a brief that you're working towards, this could be a presentation from that client to show what problem they need solved. Okay, because often what we're doing in this process is solving a problem or coming up with an innovative solution to something that already exists. All right, cool. Any questions about Pākeke at this stage before I move through the next? Feel free. I really want this to be an interactive session in terms of you guys coming to me and asking me any questions that I can clarify for you in terms of what this might look like in practice. So are there any questions about how that might be delivered in the classroom at this point? Feel free to pop them in the chat or just unmute yourself and jump in. Awesome. All right, I'll jump into the next slide. Tuhura is your discovery phase. This is a long phase. So if we think about what inquiry learning might be, this is where that happens. So this is knowledge building. If you've looked at solo taxonomy, this is that gathering facts, okay? So this is where you might say guided reading, maths activities, science experiments, dance and drama, all of those areas of the curriculum, but the theme of it, or it all relates back to that problem. So for example, if I use the community garden again, and we've looked at a food waste example, this might be where you go, we're going to read some school journals that talk about waste in New Zealand or talk about food waste. We might look at a science experiment where we look at how we can grow our own vegetables to provide food for ourselves, which takes away the plastic. So you're looking at different opportunities that might not be about your project, but they link in underlying. So what I mean is you almost don't want to let the kids know what you're doing yet. You want them to reach that themselves, okay, depending on how you do it. So in the next section, when they make the connection, that's where you want them to have that light bulb moment and go, because we've done all this, we should do this. And you go, yes, that's exactly what we're going to do, okay? So you're trying to lead them to that conclusion themselves rather than going, hey kids, we're going to build a community garden, because for them, that's you telling them what you're going to create rather than them coming up with the solution themselves, which gives them agency and ownership over the next part of the process. So you want to almost lead them to it by dotting little bits and pieces. When you're in this stage, the other important thing to remember is this is where you're going to see kids go off in different directions. So you'll have kids go, I actually really like the recycling aspect of this, or I really like the gardening aspect of this. And as you go into your project, those skills and those passions that these kids are showing will help in terms of collaboration in the overarching project. So it's really nice to reflect on what's happening in this stage as kids start to decide what they're passionate about and what their lens might be before they even know what they're doing. Okay, and I'll explain this a little bit more as we go through an example project so you can see what I mean. Okay, any questions about Tuhura? When I say it's a long stage, it really depends on how long you want to take the project for. This would probably be a good third of that time, okay? So it's quite a decent amount of time that you would spend in this stage. Any questions about that? Cool, awesome. Hono, connect. Making meaning, relational, and if you're talking solo taxonomy, it's connecting the dots together. So this is where you would start going, we've done some things on gardening and growing vegetables. We've done some things on food waste. Let's look at some existing solutions or what people are doing to solve these problems themselves. So you're starting to kind of bring the idea of what you're going to create to the surface. You're kind of teasing it in there and saying, these guys did this amazing community garden where people come in Australia and it looks amazing and all this success. So you're showing videos and you're showing kind of examples of the potential of the product or the kind of solution. So when the kids see that, they're going, I know about that. I learned about that in that guided reading session the other day or something like that. And they go, we could do that and it could look like this and we can have our own version. So they start adding their own flair to what you're getting to at the end. Okay, so this is that really, I do this symbol because this is the solo taxonomy symbol, so I apologize, I do this all the time. It's out of habit. But this is that making connections. It's going, here's all these facts, here's all this knowledge that I've got. I can actually understand how they work together now. Okay, and this is where you would introduce that overarching big question that we talked about last week. So how might we incorporate this and this and this to create da 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 da? How might we impact this by doing this da 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 da? Because the kids are going to be at that stage of thinking where they go, now that I know what I know, I can see what this could be. Okay, so between tuhura and discover, that's where you're starting to go, okay, here's all this knowledge, you're making meaning between all the facts that you've gathered, and now you can see the potential of what we're going to create. Okay, any questions about that stage? This is a short phase, so this is kind of a really small, I should do a percentage list really, but it's really up to your practice and how long you've got to do it, but it is a transition phase between the knowing and the doing. Okay, so it is a shorter phase. Any questions about that? Okay, cool. Feel free to pop in or pop in the chat. Oaha. Oaha is creation. So this is where you're cut off from introducing new stuff. Okay, so no more guided reading sessions on this. No more kind of new maths, because the kids should be out there doing it. So if you've been doing measurement in terms of growth of your carrots or something like that, and you've been doing activities to promote that measurement, the kids should be out there growing carrots and measuring those things in real life now. So that's that next step, okay? So if you've been doing things around a community garden again, this is where you would be going, okay, who's going to be in charge of getting sponsorship for the shovels? Who's going to organise this? What's our design going to be? What kind of plants grow well at this time of the year? How can we get a yearly cycle going here? This is the real planning stage, the doing. Okay, who's going to paint it? Who's going to work with us? Who can we talk to bring in to give us seeds? That kind of stuff. All right. So it's definitely moving towards the doing, because what you'll see is that the kids are going to make much stronger decisions because of the information that you've given them, because of the knowledge that they've got now. They're actually going to make decisions based on that knowledge, not just going through the process with you and learning the knowledge at the same time. They're actually going to make really good decisions based on that. This is your other long phase. So again, another third. Okay, so I would say a third for the second phase, a third for this phase, and everything else is split between. Okay. Any questions about that oaha phase? Pretty self-explanatory. It's nice when you're going to see it in an example anyway. Okay, omiri, refine. So again, I'll just let Lucy in there. To smooth, to buff or polish, to make ready. So this is when you've got a few options here. Students should be giving feedback on each other's work. So you've kind of hit that draft point, that prototype point, okay? Students should then be giving feedback. If you can get experts back in, that's even better, okay? And this is where you need to allow time for that feedback to be applied. Often what we see is that we'll go, oh, yeah, what do we think? Oh, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this, but we never have the time to actually make those changes. So we want kids to be able to understand that iteration and change is a great thing. And it's part of the process, because if they go into a job in technology or STEM or anything like that, failing fast and change is what they're going to be doing every day. So they need to understand that that's a huge part of creating something, is that iteration. It's not going to be perfect the first time, okay? Any questions about that point? Fabulous. You guys are pros. Okay, takoha, share. This is your event. It's really important to have an event. This is where you kind of see the fruits of your labour, but also the kids see it and they feel that mana, and your families get involved, your school gets involved, those experts get involved. Every project you do should have an event or a sharing night or an exhibition or something that actually goes, we've worked really hard to create this for whoever it may be. Okay, that's a really important part. It's also a really important measurement point for you to see, actually, have the kids understood it? Have we answered the question we came in with? Have we got the depth? or are they just rattling off information? Okay, so you'll be able to tell that straight away from the engagement of the students, but also the end product of what you've created. Post feedback, post all this work that you guys have put in. Okay, the takoha, the sharing, is a really, really important piece. All right, so I highly recommend putting some effort into creating something. And it doesn't mean that you have to go and organize this amazing event. Get the kids to organize it. Okay, the kids are going to be so passionate about what they're creating. Get a wee social media team and get a wee event planning team, and the kids that go around with the cameras and make a documentary that you share on a parent night or something like that. So there's often ways that you can work around. And also, if we think about differentiation and supporting students that may find structures like this quite difficult, or maybe they're struggling to keep up with the rest of their team, you can bring those students in and give them those jobs and give them that part of being within the project if you're doing it as a group, as a class. Okay, so there's lots of different ways you can bring that in there. All right, any questions about kind of the stages or anything at this point? I'll just flip back to the whole cycle. Whoop. Any questions about that before I jump in and show you a couple of bits and pieces? Any wonderings? As always, pop them in the chat if you need to, or you can unmute and just have a kōrero with me. Often what one person is thinking is what the rest of the room's thinking, so it's often good to say it out loud. Okay. Interrupt me if you want to as well. Okay, I'm jumping through. Here we go. This is going to give you a wee bit of an idea of what our platform looks like in terms of Education Perfect. Now, I'm going to show you some things that we've created on EP. That does not mean that you need to use the EP versions or utilize these at all. It's just to give you an idea of how we've structured it. Okay, so this is just going to show you a bunch of slides from our Whare of the Future project, which I'm going to take you through, as well as a couple of others, to show you the kind of skills that we develop and the resources that we use. This is aimed at levels 3 and 4 of the curriculum, so your year 5 to 8 range, really. So if you look at the reading level, you'll see that. But yeah, I'll show you what I mean. So there's a wee bit of music here. Hopefully you can hear it. Hopefully it's not too loud. I might turn it down just to start with. Can you hear that? Perfect. All right. That was going to annoy me, so I had to play the end, otherwise the letters wouldn't have lined up for me. That just gives you a wee bit of an idea of what it looks like. Oh, actually, I'll just jump back here. So that is based on kind of the planning template we went over yesterday, that structure. So you would have seen that over the lessons or over each section, we got more and more specific. We almost zoomed right in on the nitty gritty. And then at the very end, it came back out and it's like, okay, well done. You're a builder of tomorrow. You're this innovator. You've done all this work. Obviously, being an online platform, we can't exactly run an exhibition night ourselves in every school in the country. However, we have a lot of people that had exhibition nights and showcased the work that the kids did. One of the things that showed up there was a workbook that you would have seen in that Google Doc version. I highly recommend scaffolding a whole project out or a whole kind of cycle out so that you can have the kids working through that and have that evidence for you as you go. It's much easier to have that scaffolding in place, which is what this planning is for, rather than creating it as you go, because then it becomes very blurry for the kids about what their next steps are. If the kids can see kind of, oh yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to go through this, then they're able to move through step by step, and your independent kids are going to be able to go forward and utilize their independence and their agency and kind of move forward. And then the ones that need support are going to see a really scaffolded timeline in place, and you can support them because your independence will go off and do it, and you can spend that time with those ones that need extra support. Okay, so I used to do mine in Google Slides. I used to use a different cycle before I created this one. And I used to have everything with the symbol, and I'd have like the activities we were going to do. Didn't necessarily give them the answers of what the end result would be, but it was scaffolding all that information so that every student had this kind of workbook where I could see all the evidence, and it was really easy to keep track of where students were at. For our projects, we use Google Docs, which allows us to have kids working collaboratively. So you can have a group working on a project together, or they can be doing it independently. It's completely up to you. Just on group work, sometimes it works. Sometimes it can be a little bit blurry depending on who you have in your classroom. I wouldn't do groups of more than 3 personally, especially if it's your first time round. Even 2 is really good, because as soon as you go bigger than 3, kids start to lose accountability and work falls more on one child or two children versus the rest of the group. So 2 and 3 is a really ideal number to work through something together so that the work or kind of the mahi can be split evenly across, because that's often something that comes up when you do big group projects. Okay. So again, this was our template we had a look at last time as a unit overview. Okay, so if we went through this last time and we did a little bit with our sticky notes and stuff on Miro, so we had our outcome in the middle, and the outcome was that tangible product or that tangible kind of project that you guys thought of in that ideation session when you had to think of so many ideas. So again, I'm going to use the community garden one as an example because for some reason it's always at the front of my mind. Maybe I should build one. We'll put that in the center. We had our vision, what you want for your kids. And again, that's really important. I know that it might be a bit cheesy and fluffy, but every decision you're making should be towards that vision. Okay, otherwise it stays a vision. When you think of your question and your impact, those two are really intertwined. So I often go impact first and then go out. So community garden, who does that impact? The community, but also our food waste, so the recycling, all of these things that you can kind of tag to who this will impact, what is the impact of it. Then you create your question. So how can we diminish food waste and food insecurity in our community? That's your question that you would put. So you've already got your outcome, your impact, so then it's really easy to create that question based on that. Okay? The question should not say what the solution is. So how might we create a community garden is a very different question to how might we solve food waste and food insecurity in our community. Can you see the difference between the impact that those questions would have? It's quite a large kind of scale thing, and kids might think, the news can be quite a depressing thing to watch sometimes. We have a lot of media and we have a lot of stuff coming at us all the time, and for kids they think, how am I going to make a difference? Can I really make a difference? I'm just one person. But when you're providing questions like this, that's them making a difference in a big way, rather than just creating something for the sake of creating something. Okay, so that's what I want you to remember. That's why I tease it out like this, so that you can create a really impactful, overarching view of what you're doing. Okay. The bottom half, again, that was our community and connection. So who are the people? Where can you get information from? Who can come in and support you? Because you're one person, okay? You can't do it all, and there's no reason why you should. You have parents, you have whānau, you have experts in the fields that you're looking at that can come in and support you. And many are super happy and super eager to get involved with things like this. You'll be amazed at who would love to donate time to support our tamariki. So definitely use those email skills, those get on the phone and ring somebody up and say, hey, would you be keen to come and talk to our class? Or, hey, could we come and visit you? What would that look like? Because the worst thing that could happen is that they say no, right? So definitely worth reaching out. The other side is about your environments, both digitally and physically. Okay, so thinking about how can you create a digital version of this? How can you add another layer to make sure that you're in that 21st century realm of teaching, but also that's often the bit where it goes from being just a class project or just a community project to being something that can be accessed nationally, regionally, or even globally. Okay, so thinking about that digital aspect. Learning environments, I spoke about this last week. Our neurons in our brain start firing new connections when we're learning something in a new environment. So that's just, your psychology. So if you're thinking about teaching something brand new, it's often got more stickiness when it's done somewhere new, okay? So having a think about where you can do this learning. And depending on, your experience, depending on your school, that might look quite different, depending on your school policies and all that kind of thing. But it's definitely worth exploring and worth the effort, in my opinion, as well. Okay, cool. So I'm going to jump out of here for a second. Just move this over here. There we go.
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
You know how your learning outcome hopefully is a community garden, and you've asked that question. Have you ever had the situation where what you thought the project would be, they came up with another idea? That it wasn't a community garden. What do you do in that situation? Just you change what you're going to do, or?
There's a couple of different answers to that, because that has happened, and it does happen, and it's a fantastic when kids come up and you kind of get the whole class going, that's a really cool idea, Jimmy, let's do that, that's better than what we were going to do, or that kind of thing. And you've got a couple of options. I think it really depends on how comfortable you feel to facilitate such a thing, and also thinking about the length of time that you are giving the project, because often if you go, let's go in that direction, you're going to have to extend the amount of time that you've put towards the project, because it does take a little bit more kind of getting your head around understanding it, and letting the kids lead that as well takes a little bit more extension, in my opinion. This looks different in every classroom I've been in. It looks so different. Honestly, this is a framework for you to go, if kids want to come up with their own projects, you can definitely still use this to do that. If you want to do a whole class project where you have the same outcome, this framework can do that as well. So really it's about framing it in that first half to lead them to that question and hoping, and usually they do stick with what you kind of are going for, because the way you structure it and the resources you give them are going to be if I was researching a community garden, these are the things that I would look at, and that's what you put in that first section.
Right, okay?
Yeah,
Great.
So you're kind of framing their thinking for them as they go through.
Great,
okay?
Thank you.
But yeah, if it does happen, you can either run with it, or you can kind of try and bring them back to that core piece that you want to. I think it really does depend on how many times you've done it and how confident you feel with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
No worries. Okay. This is my mess of a Miro board. This is my brainstorming page. But I thought it was actually quite cool to share with you the thinking that goes into what we create. So this is not I just did a Google Doc and wrote it all down and it was done. This is weeks of research, dumping things on a board, all that kind of thing. Because the amount of time that this takes up, you want to make sure that you've got enough stuff in there to really make it meaty and make it stick. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom in here if I can, because I've got the mouse on and it's not working properly. Ooh. Right, there we go. Okay. So you can see I've got my stages across the top here. This is just to allow me to kind of isolate bits and pieces and kind of focus on each stage. So I'm going to flick between here and my presentation so that I can show you how it works. So this one here is our, actually, this is not a good one to show you because we rewrote this one about 3 times. Let me go to a different one. This is the sustainable garden one. Why don't we do that one? Funny that. Okay. So Pakeke. What is the issue? Okay. Discover what's being done about it and connecting that together in the next section. Then we're creating, refining, and sharing. Okay. So you can see here we've got links, we've got videos, we've got websites, all that kind of stuff that go into it. If I was in the classroom, this is where I'd be bringing in journal readings. I'd be looking on Science Learning Hub. I'd be going on resource sites to find things that I can bring in to support this, okay, to support your idea that you're creating. So when we go into the platform, I'll just show you how it's structured. And I'm just processing. I know a few people have filled in a form to sign up for access to this, which you totally can have. I'm just still working through a couple of things with our policies to make sure that you guys have access to this. And I'll send all that out after the last session so you can have access to this, because all of this stuff is free. Just a reminder that it's all free to use in your classrooms, okay? So let's have a look at, this is the Sustainable Garden project itself, actually. So this is Pakeke, so you could see there that each section we've actually built a lesson, so we've kept them quite separate, and I recommend that even in practice you do that as well. You keep them quite separate. We have posters, which I'll also send out after the last session, that are in kids speak and also with the synonyms that you can actually put on the whiteboard. And we've got the spiral as a big poster, and I would say you have these definitions and you go, right, this is the stage that we're at. You put it up on your whiteboard and you start looking at what that looks like, locating all those things as you're doing sessions on the floor, as you're working through whatever it might be. And then the next week you might put the next one up and say, right, we're at this stage now, and everything within your day then links to that stage that you've got on the board, okay, or everything within your inquiry time or however you run it, all right? So let's have a look at this one. You can see that this is quite a short section. So compared to the next ones, it will be quite short, and that's because it is that hook piece, okay? Now, because again, we're online, we can't take kids to a community garden, so we're going to provide teachers with a way that they can ignite students thinking about the idea. So we introduce the framework, and then we start unpacking that Pakeke section. So food waste is a huge problem in many countries, including Aotearoa. Have you ever wondered what happens when people throw kai away? How do we manage parakai or food waste? Why is it a problem for us? It's just prompting that thinking, igniting that idea. Just zoom in a wee bit for you. Can you guys see that okay? Awesome. In Aotearoa, households waste more than 150,000 tonnes of food every year, mainly bread, leftovers and fruit. This much food could feed a city like Otipoti, Dunedin for 3 years. So giving them a shock factor, giving them a, whoa, this is way bigger than I thought it was going to be. So you're giving them that problem. Same with if you're looking at a technology cycle with the client, giving them that problem, why is this such an issue for you? Okay. Now, if we go into the next piece, we again talk about, while we throw away tons of kai every year, there are still people going hungry. Food insecurity is when people regularly lack access to proper kai. So these are things that you can facilitate, not as a written slide like this, but as a conversation, as a discussion, as a brainstorm. Okay. You might take them to the dump and look at the landfill and things like that to kind of bring all of these ideas to light. People in Aotearoa are acting together and empowering others to fight food insecurity and support their community. So you can see we're dotting in these ideas before they actually know what they're doing, what they're creating. Okay. Next thing. How do food waste and food insecurity connect to each other? So what are the problems and how do they interrelate? It might just be one problem. In this case, it was 2 separate things we wanted to tackle. And that we talk about a little bit more about framing those things, okay? Then you start getting them to kind of think about how it impacts us, how it impacts the community. So thinking, again, they're unpacking the problem, they're unpacking the potential impact of the problem so that they can then solve that problem, okay? So what does it look like and what are the impacts of it? Simple, okay? And that's it. That's the whole section done. That's Pakeke. That could be done in half an hour if you were using a lesson like this. It could be done in an afternoon if you were going to the landfill. Okay, so that's that whole section done. That's how short that piece is. Okay. Any questions about that? And Kerry, as always, feel free to jump in and add any thoughts, or whakaaro if you have any along the way. Awesome. Okay. Discover. This is our second section. All right. Preventing waste. So you're going to see tuhura and hono is going to be our other big stage as well, just because of the way that we've created this one. But if I was in the classroom in practice doing it hands-on, this would be a larger piece of the puzzle, if that makes sense. Okay. So the first step in reducing waste is avoiding creating it. So this is where I'd be looking at people like Kiwi Harvest or people who are doing things, people that are preventing certain aspects of the problem, but not the solution for the whole problem. Okay, I know that sounds trickier when it comes out of my mouth than it does in my brain, but I'm going to try really hard to explain it better. Okay, so reducing waste is especially important when it comes to kai, because there are still people suffering the impacts of hunger and food insecurity. Watch the videos below to see examples of people who prevent food waste by redistributing it, teaching communities about waste, and empowering others to find solutions. So it's starting to drop in this information about potential solutions, potential information. How do we use waste? Okay. Protecting the land. So again, bringing in mātauranga Māori concepts that kind of relate, a lot of our projects relate to the living world. So again, mātauranga Māori is all about connectedness, and so is a lot of these projects, because the impact you're creating is connection between yourself as a student, yourself as a class, yourself as a school, to the land, to the people. So often there's a really beautiful concept and connection you can bring in there to enhance that understanding as well. Okay, so becoming kaitiaki, becoming guardians of our place, of our food, of our people, and looking after each other, and also supporting mental health. So again, we've got not necessarily the answer to the problem, but we're dropping in tidbits that will allow students to go, hey, this mental health stuff, this is where I actually want to focus my energy on. Okay, this is where I'm really interested, and you'll see kids light up at different points along the way. Okay. The next section is where we start looking at going into hono, that connection phase, and we're bringing in that question. How might we contribute to solving food insecurity and food waste in our community with our community? Okay, we're currently producing kai that's going to be wasted, impacting our communities and papatuanuku negatively. The big question is, how can we okay? What might be a good way to create that connection? So what I've done here is tried to turn what I would be doing in practice in a hands-on environment, going back and forth, providing these resources, science, maths, whatever, and we've turned it into an online scaffolded kind of activity book, if that makes sense. So I want you to kind of look at this stuff, but take it with a grain of salt, because much of this will happen hands-on in your classroom with hands-on activities and hands-on experiences. Okay, this is just to give you a framework. Then we head to the next section. So in hono, we start getting a little bit nitty gritty. Now this is a interesting project, because not only is there a lot of planning involved, but there's a lot of building involved. So when we did the planning was a lot around making connections around what they've learned and planning the next stage. Because when we get to the creation phase, it's about actually digging the holes, planting the plants, building the fences, all that kind of stuff. So if you've only got 6 weeks or a term to do this, often your planning will skip into that making connections phase, because you're going, okay, I can make the connection and know that we need sponsors, so who am I going to reach out to? Okay, hopefully that makes sense. What is a community garden? You're just dropping that one in there. Funnily enough, we're going to be making one of those. So they've had the question and they go, oh, we should make a garden. And then you start going, okay, well, what is a community garden? Let's unpack that a little bit more. And if they don't come up with that on their own, you can kind of start to filter that in and say, hey, look, what about a community garden? What do we think about that idea, guys? Like, how might that look in our community? Where could we build something like that? Do you think that would be helpful? And seeing them go, yeah, actually, maybe it would, or it might be a community pantry or something like that. A lot of the kind of principles will still apply. Okay, this is when they'll start actually moving into doing their independent or group work. They'll start making decisions, they'll start planning, they'll start ideating what they're going to contribute to this project. Okay, so then we go through. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I'll go into it because I don't want to confuse you. I'll go into the create stage. So then we start going to the listing the materials. We're going to prepare the materials and equipment to actually create your community garden. So this bit's really important to make sure you've got your T's crossed and your I's dotted, especially if you're going off-site to do something, making sure that you've covered those things. And actually, you don't need to do that. The kids can be a part of structuring that. So the kids can decide what equipment are we going to need? Who are we going to get it from? What's the health and safety around this? So what's our plan of action? Gather the list of plants you can grow where and when you start. So in the previous section, in one of those long bits, it was about what kind of plants grow good when, okay? And then now it's about, right, what are we actually going to create? Kiri, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, that's going to make really, really neat links to those indicators of progression. So it's fantastic. You're naturally going to be doing that. So that you can start ticking some boxes because they're just natural links rather than forced activities to tick boxes. It's just going to be an inherent woven aspect of the project naturally.
And that's the beautiful thing about it, is that it is a really natural link. It doesn't feel forced when you do something like this. It just happens. And as long as you spend the time figuring it out at the beginning and going, what's the timeline here? How can I sequence this? What's a really natural progression if I was to do this myself, and then kidify it? You've got a beautiful transition between one step and the next, and it will just happen naturally. And you'll be so surprised at how comfortable the kids are with that. They don't need a lot of pushing to move from one step to the other. They do that, as you say, Kiri, very naturally as well. Okay, awesome. Finding sponsors again, reaching out, and then heading over to that next phase. So in the next phase, this one, I might show you a different one, because this one was around bringing in gardening experts and having a look at the garden, but it was also about creating almost a roster for the community to help run the garden. So it was actually finding out who was keen to help run it. So there's always these kind of extra bits inside that kind of help us out. I might show you a different one just to give you a different context, because we've talked a lot about gardening. Let's have a look at, actually, is there any that are standing out to you at this point? So we've got a few here we've got 9 that are up there. Are there any that are standing out to you as something you want to have a look at? Take a suggestion.
What about the one, I can't see all of it, but it says protect our Y, setting up a freshwater something. Don't know what the rest of it is.
Yeah, no, you're right. Setting up a freshwater monitoring kit. Okay, this was a really fun one. It started off with the kids creating their own freshwater monitoring kit that they would then go and measure freshwater and measure the quality. But we found that to do that, there's a long period of time before you see results of that. So it's almost a year-long process where they have to go out and get your first results, then they have to go out again and do it and compare those, So what we created instead was actually the kids create a kit that can be borrowed by the community, so that the community is actually going out and getting this data. So the community are now looking after their waters and being involved in the protection of our water, which then takes it to that next level impact, right? You're actually embedding a sense of kaitiakitanga across your community, not just within your school. And the kids are embedding that in the community. Okay, so again, you take it to that next level. So again, framework. When we see an issue, we often seek a solution. We're natural problem solvers, like when an inventive New Zealander created egg beaters, which helped to make delicious cakes faster. So often giving those kind of number 8 wire examples, this isn't a new thing, this is something that we can all do, inspires them to go, oh, okay, well, let's have a go, What comes to mind when you think about water? Create a mind map on water, writing down ideas or words. There's no right or wrong answers, just a little something to get us started on the journey. So again, it's a different igniter, but it has the same impact because it's about igniting that thinking and saying, okay, what do we know already? What are some ideas around water? Now that you have your mind map, what are the threats to your local water sources? What does your environment need? You can research your local news or online sources that mention questions around water use and the importance of water sources. All of those things. So you're just starting to get them to put their feelers out to understand the idea a little bit better. Cool. Heading over to the next section. Water is vital and needs protection and care. So now you're doing this lay of the land information. So this would be, if it was me in the classroom, I'd be finding a reading or a newspaper article about the Whanganui River and how it got legal personhood, and looking at whakapapa of water and how that connects in Te Ao Māori. That was a beautiful linkage that created a beautiful kōrero around what that means, what water means in Aotearoa. So there's always those linkages you can bring in. Similar to the Whanganui River, Kai Tiaki Guardians have been slowly cleaning up Lake Waikare in Waikato for the past 10 years. So again, we're looking at people who are kind of doing bits and pieces, but surely there's a better way. Surely there's something that we could do to help this. Okay, so you're kind of dotting these things in. Land impacts on water. So again, we've got wee clickables and things, but depends what you're doing in your classroom. Why has its own life force? So again, linking it back to Te Ao Māori and bringing that in. So again, you're seeing lots of different aspects of the issue, so you can see where the kids are going, and you're giving them enough information that they can make a decision on what they're doing. Okay. What are the consequences of poor water quality? Why is it an issue? What's the big deal? Okay. Then we do a little bit more writing, and then we go into the next section. So as we're building, I wonder if I actually just show you. Sorry, now I'm jumping all around the show. Because I'll provide this to you guys at the end of this. This is a teacher guide that kind of explains our projects, but also gives you a bit more information. Tales of our kaitiaki, protecting our taio. Apologies for the scrolling. Just trying to find the right one. Here we go. Okay, so in each of these sections, so we just looked at tuhura. So in the next section, hono, it says learners connect the pieces needed for setting up a freshwater survey. They identify a local water environment, discover a resource, so lawa, understanding freshwater standards, and set goals for their survey. What might they be looking for? What is the problem in their local area? So that's where you would kind of localise the situation to where you are across Aotearoa. Then we go to awaha. They harness the knowledge of mentors and support of sponsors to set up the equipment and the data sheet. So they go, okay, we know what we're looking for. We know what the problem is for our local area. We know what the big problem is for New Zealand and what the threats are. So what do we actually need to find out here? What's our survey questions? What are the data points we need? How are we going to get that data? Okay, so again, you're narrowing it down. You're going, starting out really big, and then you're zooming into the issue. This is probably a much easier way. I should have done this from the beginning. In this lesson, Akonga use storytelling to empower their community to join the project and complete a last round of feedback before launching. So in this part, that was about them reaching out to the eyesight or the local museum and going, hey, we really want the community involved. How can we market this? How can we use you guys to help the community know that this is available for them to borrow and to use? Okay. And often in that feedback session, it's about finding those little holes that have been missed along the way and going, actually, you haven't done your health and safety thing that you need to do here, or you haven't done this wee bit, and it's following up those things. And then Omari refine, Takoha share. Ending the Takoha lesson, learners finish their workbook and upload it, as well as the instruction booklet and community publication. If it was a hands-on session, if it was in my classroom, I would be going to the council and going, here's what we're doing to protect our freshwater. What are you doing to protect our freshwater? And actually creating that next kind of conversation. Like, we've done our bit, what are you doing? And having that kind of next impact, because often that leads to some beautiful next steps. We had a group in Cromwell in Central Otago that did a Lake Dunstan project with Lagara Siphon, the lakeweed, and there's now a whole board called the Guardians of Lake Dunstan that is the council and our school students that work together and have meetings and do lake cleanups and things like that had come from a project like this. So you never know where things like this could lead and the impact that that has on our kids. And they've been doing that for about 4 years now from that one project. So there's lots of cool stories that come out of doing an impactful project like this. So I'll just jump back to the presentation. Just to recap. Here we go. So Pakeke is your launch, your igniter. Tuhura is your exposure phase. Experts, knowledge building. Okay. Hono, introduce that guiding question. transition from knowledge building to skills and doing. Okay. Oaha, the doing is a long phase. You want depth and not breadth. That's why you spend more time here creating. Omiri, feedback, ask your experts back in, revisit that knowledge that you've had and say, are we actually answering the question we set out? And having that 21st century skill focus, looking at that collaboration and that feedback. Okay. Takoha, exhibition, that's where you will see if you've got depth or breadth, and you'll see that engagement and motivation because of who is there and who it's impacting. Okay. That is the cycle in a nutshell. And I know that showing you an online version versus what I would have done in the classroom is a little bit tricky. However, you know, I could tell you lots of different bits and pieces that we've done. I didn't use this cycle, but it was when I was in the classroom before I created this. But I did a session on, actually, I wonder whether I can actually, I reckon I can. When did I go? Let me just have a wee quick. I'll just tell you about it. We did a sustainability focus, and it was called "Is the solution to sustainability in my pocket?" And it was an app design project. But I was like, do I teach the kids to code an app, or do I teach the kids about sustainability? Because sometimes it's just too much, and there was no way that if I was teaching kids to code, they were going to lose the sustainability information when that's the piece I really wanted them to get out of it. So I made the decision to go, here's all this information about sustainability. We did alternative energy, we did electric vehicles, we did waste, we did healthy homes, all that kind of thing. And then I said, okay, so now you're going to, well, we came up with the idea to create an app out of it. How can we share this information and get the community involved in creating a sustainable future, basically? So then I found a website where you could actually create a basic drag and drop website. So the kids would do a piece of persuasive writing to showcase to the community why they should be involved and what the impacts of their particular topic was. Then they had to create kind of a product that they would have. So I had two of my boys who really struggled actually with literacy, and they created an app called Showerify. And it's like Spotify, but it was about saving water. So they created playlists that depended on your mood. If you were back from rugby training or you had getting ready to go out to a party, and all of the playlists they created had songs in them that were the recommended shower time to save water. So they were creating something that could be used by the community to conserve water, and they had a piece of writing attached to that app that could then talk about that research and talk about why they came to that conclusion. Another one we had was, it was right at the beginning of COVID actually, and it was called, EV Bolt, and it was about supporting local businesses through electric vehicles. Now, how those two linked together was that kids would say, okay, we've got people that have got electric vehicles, which are great, but where can they charge them and how can they support local businesses? Because in the times of COVID, that was really tough. So they created this Google map that showed in Otago, because that's where I was, in Otago, where the electric vehicle charging stations were. And if they clicked on it, it said, here's where the charging station is, and here's the local businesses you could support while you wait for your car to be charged. So they could actually plan a road trip and charge their car and visit and support local businesses along the way. And again, so all of them were different, but the start is the same. You're kind of planting that seed, and then you see them kind of move into that. And all the apps were different, but the outcome was the same. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's about coming up with that project and that outcome, and then going, you don't want everyone to create a poster on the water cycle, because that's not helpful for anybody except for their knowledge about the water cycle. But if you're thinking about an app or an outcome, it might be a wearable arts show. It might be a living museum. What's the impact of that, and how can kids showcase their knowledge and their kind of passions within that, but within the same outcome to make it easier for you, but also impactful for everybody. Okay. All right, I'm going to leave it there because it's a lot of info I've thrown at you again. What we're going to do next week is I'm going to give you a version of the cycle that's actually for you. So a version of the cycle that you can use to follow along with your students with some really powerful questions to go, how is my practice looking as I follow this cycle? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about reflection and about how you can use it as a practice. And it could be used across any subject area, to be honest, in your whole practice. But I just thought it would be quite a powerful tool. I've had quite a few schools use it for their own knowledge as well and go, actually, for me to understand it and use it with my kids, I want to take myself through it as well. So it's a nice way for you to follow the cycle too. But what I'd like to do now is just finish off with a karakia, and then we'll use the last wee bit for any comments or questions that you may have. Okay, so we'll do a karakia whakamutunga. So kia inoi tātou. Ka whakairia te tapu. Kia wātea ai te ara. Kia turuki whakataha ai. Kia turuki whakataha ai. Haumie huie tai kie. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I'll just open up the floor to questions, or if anybody has any comments or thoughts